I'm Rob Skeoch. I've been a career photographer. Now, I've worked mostly for Major League Baseball, I worked for the NFL, and the last 14 years I worked for Sony Imaging as they brought their digital cameras to the market. The other day I'm watching Jeopardy and I thought, boy, if I was ever on Jeopardy, I'd want to brush up on my photography. Or if I knew someone who was going to be on Jeopardy, I'd want them to know a few basic answers. So I've put together the Jeopardy trivia film photographers. So this is how it works. You're going to need a pen and a paper. Every question has points. Now in real Jeopardy it's dollars, but there's no prize here and there's no money going out. So we're going to call them points. In the Jeopardy round, the questions get harder. Now if you get the answer right, you get the points. If you get the answer wrong, you lose the points. And if you don't guess at all, then you're just sitting normal. So in the Jeopardy round, there's 3,000 points up for grabs. In the double Jeopardy, there's 6,000 points. And then Final Jeopardy allows you to wager your points on that final toughest question. So when you figure out how you've done, just put it in the comments below. Maybe there is a winner, but there's no prize. We're just having fun here. Jeopardy trivia on film photographers. Let's get started. As I said, in the Jeopardy round, the questions get harder as we go, and there's 3,000 points up for grabs. So here's the first question. Afghan Girl is considered the most famous portrait in photography, taken by Steve McCurry and first published on the cover of this magazine. Of course, Steve's picture was published on National Geographic in June 1985, and Steve's had a lot of great National Geographic covers. 400-point question. When the moon rose over Half Dome and Hernandez, this photographer was zoned in. Of course, this is the great landscape photographer, the great American photographer, Ansel Adams, who worked a lot in Yosemite Park. 600 points. After photographing 142 covers for a music magazine, this celebrity photographer took their Hasselblad and rolled over to Vanity Fair. The great photographer, great portrait photographer, Annie Leibovitz. Wonderful work, wonderful portraits, working for the greatest magazines with the greatest celebrities. After photographing peppers at least 30 times, this photographer's peppers started looking like nudes, and his nudes looked a bit like peppers. Well, if you said Edward Weston, you'd be bang on. This is his famous pepper number 30. Weston was an American photographer working on the West Coast, and he's shooting mostly with 8x10. A cigar was snatched from the Roaring Lion by this Canadian photographer. The portrait of Churchill, the Roaring Lion, taken by Canadian photographer Karsh, is considered one of the greatest portraits ever taken, and Karsh snatched the cigar out of his hand just before taking the photo. Now let's go on to the double Jeopardy round, where every question is worth twice as many points. Again, if you get it right, you get the points. If you get it wrong, you lose the points. And if you don't guess, everything sits still. Now remember, no looking these up on Google. This Leica-wielding photographer is considered the father of photojournalism, whether he's shooting on the streets of Paris or behind the station. Of course, the father of photojournalism was Henri Cartier-Bresson, the great French photographer. He's one of the founding members of Magnum. He traveled the world with his Leicas, photographing street scenes, and sort of started street photography, started photojournalism, traveled as much as he could. And his most famous photo is behind the station. 800 points. This Hungarian photographer had part of his film ruined by the London Film Lab on June 7, 1944, after waiting on an Omaha beach with his contacts and trying to get close enough. Or so the story goes. That was the story that Robert Capa told, why his films were so grainy and kind of ruined. Now, since then, people have said, well, maybe that's not exactly how it happened. But Omaha Beach, D-Day, and the next day his film was ruined in the London lab. 1,200 points. Actor Owen Wilson's mother, Laura, assisted this New York fashion photographer as he headed west to photograph misfits, drifters, and cowboys. It turns out Owen Wilson's mother, Laura, was a photographer in the Dallas area, and when the great fashion photographer Richard Avedon worked on his series The American West, she was one of his main assistants. Now, Avedon was there photographing cowboys and drifters and going to local fairs and trying to photograph local people, shooting on 8x10 with his classic white background. 1,600 points. This life photographer actually combined two images in the darkroom to create a third image, now considered a classic, of Dr. Albert Schweitzer building a hospital in West Africa. Things were a little freer back in the day when Eugene Smith combined two negatives to create this great image. Things are a little more restricted now. You're not allowed to take two shots and add them together. But back then, there wasn't quite as many rules. 2,000 points. After stating for years it was a caught moment, this French photographer changed his story and revealed the subjects in The Kiss were paid models when they took him to court. The great French Paris photographer Robert Desnos, I'm probably saying it wrong, but he claimed for years that this was a caught moment of this couple kissing on the streets of Paris. It turns out when they took him to court, it turned out he had hired them to be models, and he had just denied it all those years. So, take your Jeopardy points, add your double Jeopardy points, and that gives you a number of points that you can wager on this final question. Final Jeopardy. Here we go. On a one-day assignment to photograph an average day in the life of President Reagan, this photographer loaded color film into his Leicas instead of the Tri-X he usually bulk loaded. The day wasn't all that average after the president was shot in a failed assassination attempt. Yeah, this is part of history that people kind of forget. This was Sebastião Salgado. He was on a one-day assignment, and that was the day that Reagan got shot. So Sebastião Salgado is certainly one of the world's great photographers, and he's done magnificent exhibitions of his work. He's done some fantastic books. He's considered a great photographer, a legendary master photographer. I think some of the funding came from the fact that he lucked out on this one day with this one-day assignment. It happened to be the day that Ronald Reagan was shot. So there we have our first Jeopardy trivia. How many points did you get? Why not put it in the comments below? Remember, there was no looking things up. You had to know the answer. Let's see your scores.